Happy New Year, and welcome to the first video of the year, which apparently is a worst of last year video. I didn't actually plan on making a worst books of 2023 video this year. I've just been doing a lot better lately at DNFing books that I'm not enjoying instead of pushing through and making myself suffer. And by I'm getting better, what I mean is one of my friends specifically is really good at nagging me about just stop reading it if you don't like it. With that said, one of the last books that I read this year, in fact, I think it was the second to last book that I finished. Thank you to my reread of Republic of Thieves for saving me from that being the last book that I read. One of the last books that I read this year was so painful. I hated it so much that I decided to do this video just so I could rant about it. And I wasn't even planning, originally when I picked up this book, it was just gonna be a private read. I wasn't even gonna talk to you about it. It was never gonna make an appearance on the channel, but I hated it so much that I'm now doing this video just for that book. It'll be the last book discussed in the video. So real quick honorable mentions for the video that I filmed halfway through the year, talking about the worst books of the year so far. If I didn't do that video, Ugly Love and The Curse of Oak Island would both be on this list, but I'm not gonna be repetitive and just talk about them yet again. So I'll just link you to that video if you care, but I really didn't like either of those books. With that out of the way, some of the books I really didn't care for this year. Starting with what is going to be my most mild objection, and that's to The Frugal Wizard's Guide to Surviving Handbook. The Frugal Wizard's Handbook to Surviving Medieval England. This was one of the Secret Project books. I think I gave it 2 stars, maybe 2.5. I didn't hate it, I just didn't like it. And for a lot of people, this was their least favorite of the Secret Projects. Some people absolutely love the book, so don't let me discourage you. Look into it yourself. You might love it. I didn't. Basically what Brandon was trying to do with this book was the white wall trope. He was creating a character who is in a new setting with new conflicts and doesn't remember anything and has a handbook that will assist him in his journey. It could have been good, especially because the handbook excerpts were easily the best part about this book. They were charming and they were funny. Brandon's humor is hit or miss for me, and the guidebook pages excerpts were hilarious to me. But the handbook and the art are basically the only things that I thoroughly enjoyed about this book personally. I didn't care for our main character. He was pretty bland and boring. His personal character arc that he went through over the course of this book, I felt was cheesy at best. When he came to his big revelation moment, his aha, his I've grown as a person, it was cheesy. It was very cheesy. The conflicts and antagonists were not especially entertaining, though there was one particular twist that I did enjoy, although I've heard a lot of people complain about that twist, but I personally liked it. Plus, after I finished The Sunlit Man, it was pointed out to me that there are structurally, the Frugal Wizard's Handbook and The Sunlit Man are extremely similar. The stories themselves are extremely different, the tone, so everything, but structurally, they do kind of the same thing. And that just made me even more mad because I was like, we already have a better version of this. Why did we do this? There were things that I enjoyed about this book. Like I said, I didn't hate it. I just didn't particularly like it. And the more time I've spent with it, the more I've kind of soured on it a bit. Next up is how unfortunate. I have a couple of my favorite authors on this list. That's a bumski. Next up is The Loving Spirit. Daphne du Maurier is also one of my favorite authors, and this is the only du Maurier book that I read in 2023, which is such a bummer, but I've already agreed to a buddy read of another du Maurier book in 2024, so we can move forward. So I love du Maurier's writing and her character work. I think that she really just sinks me into a story and connects me to the characters and their very simple yet relatable struggles within the time and culture that they're in. With The Loving Spirit, we follow Janet, that's it. We follow Janet, well, we follow 4 generations, but Janet is the beginning. And she grows up in this society that she was born into, and her role as a woman is very clear and laid out to her, and she follows that role. She gets married to a very good man who treats her very well. She has wonderful children that she loves deeply, and she loves her domestic life, but she also loves adventure. And because of the time period that this is set in, a woman who loves adventure and loves her domestic life, this basically splits her. She kind of can't have both. So she's very happy with her life as a wife and a mother and a homemaker, but she also, adventure and the sea call to her. And I loved the first, 80 pages, maybe 70 pages of this book so much because as someone who loves my domestic life but also loves adventure, I just really connected with Janet and I felt for her and I was very grateful for the time that I'm living in, that I don't have to split myself. I don't have to choose between one or the other. Then the incest started and so Janet has, in her children, she has like 5 children, I don't remember. One of them she's very close with and he kind of carries her spirit. He has her spirit for adventure and he has this mischievous sort of nature about him and he's just a wee bit different and Janet really just relates to him, which could be sweet if it didn't have strong undertones of incest. And I mean strong, like you can't miss it. So Janet passes away, we follow her son, and then he passes away and we follow his son, and then he passes away and we follow his daughter. So we follow 4 generations of this family line, and the whole time Janet's spirit is just kind of hanging out, haunting. It's not true, it's actually, it's depicted as whimsical and sweet and loving, because she's looking after her family, and every now and then her spirit kind of just breaks the spirit realm and imposes itself in the story and connects with her descendants. This book was inspired by a Emily Bronte poem. It reads very Bronte. I mean, it reads very Du Maurier. It reads like Du Maurier, obviously, but you can see the Bronte inspirations. It is quite the family drama. This is the first Du Maurier book that she published, and I'm glad I read it. Why am I glad? I don't know, actually. I will say, I finished the book and I came away from this book just asking the question, but why? Like, I could not for the life of me make sense of why Du Maurier chose to write this family relationship, this mother-son relationship the way she did. I don't get it. I didn't get it. And so I sought out answers, read some articles. Turns out Du Maurier was pretty open and later in her life about a very unfortunate dynamic that she had with her father, and people speculate that this book was her working through some of those thoughts and experiences. So that really sucks. So I guess I'm glad I read it, because if Du Maurier wanted to share working through that, then she's one of my favorite authors. I'll read it. I just don't recommend this book, personally. I don't think that it's her best writing. I don't think that it's her best storytelling. And it's terribly uncomfortable. Funny enough, the first 2 authors on this list are Brandon Sanderson, Du Maurier, 2 of my favorite authors, and a new favorite author of mine, Stephen Graham Jones. I was meant to read one of his books in December, the Final Girls, The Last Final Girls, but I hated it. I hated it so much that I DNF'd it, and when I DNF'd it, it's short. It's like a novella. It's very quick. And the people that I was reading it with, I told them if I were doing a worst books of the year video, I would finish this book just so I could rant about it because I hated it so much. But I'm not doing that video, so it's not worth pushing through. And here I am doing the video. So 3 authors that I absolutely love could have been on this list if I had foresight. Thankfully, I didn't suffer. Doesn't make me love any of these authors less, by the way. I just didn't like these books. I need my Kindle so I can read to you some passages for this book because I loved reading this book so much. Okay, so this book is marketed as the worst book ever written, so naturally I had to read it. And I just kind of went on a rampage on my Patreon and I was like, y'all, we're all reading this. Everybody get the ebook. We're all going to experience this book together and it's going to be the best day of our lives. And it was, so if you don't already know, on my Patreon, every book that I plan to read that month, we set up just a mess of channels. Well, we set up a channel for every book that I plan to read that month. And then people can mute the channels they don't care about, or they can join the channels that buddy reads that they want to join in on, and we all just talk about all the books that I read all month long. So Eye of Argon was a last minute addition for me, and loads of people jumped on because it's so quick. It's like under 100 pages. And we all it was my favorite buddy read of the year because it was so fun. It's the most quotable book I've ever read, and I had a blast reading it. I recorded a dedicated reading vlog chronicling my experience reading it, and then I scrapped the whole thing, and I'll explain to you why after I read you a couple of quotes. Just to give you an idea, I can't tell you the plot of this because I don't know, but I'll give you an idea of why this book was so much fun to read and discuss. This is after Gringor walked into a bar and saw a comely wench at the bar and walked over and just kind of exposed himself naked except for a loincloth, and she was like, "Where do you come from?" And now he's talking to her. "From where do you come, barbarian, and by what are you called?" gasped the comely wench, as Gringor smothered her with lips of blazing touch of his flaming mouth. The engrossed Titan ignored the queries of the inquisitive female, pulling her toward him and crushing her sagging nipples to his yearning chest. Without struggle, she gave in, winding her soft arms around the harshly brondized of Gringor corded shoulder blades, as his calloused hands caressed her firm, protruding busts. That's a pretty typical description of a sequence of events throughout the entirety of this book. This is my favorite quote in the entire book, probably. There is a woman trapped in a hole, if I'm remembering correctly, like a pit in the ground, and he's gonna save her heroically. "Take hold of this rope," said first the soldier, "and climb out from your pit, slut. Your presence is requested in another far deeper hellhole." I just think it's so funny to imagine a guy heroically saving a woman, and the dialogue is essentially, "Come here, slut." And the action is written just as enjoyably. I'll read you one more quote and then we'll move on. Gringor grappled with the lashing flexor muscle of the repugnant body of the gargantuan, brown-hided rat, striving to hold his razor teeth from his juicy jugular as its beady gray organs of sight glazed into the flaring emeralds of its prey. So it's a hero being heroic and gaining all of the wenches along the way. That's what the short story is. It became a meme on my server to call me the compliant wench because of a few lines where women were just referred to as the compliant wench. And I thought it was so funny. So yeah, it's on the worst books of the year list because clearly it's not the best written story, but I had the most fun reading through it just because it was such a trip. Now, back to the vlog. When I started reading it as I was chronicling my reading experience, reading off my favorite lines, analyzing the story, just having the best time. All in not like a roasting sort of way, just as in I'm enjoying the chaos of this nonsense kind of way. My goal at the end of the vlog, because I was genuinely enjoying it, I wasn't just picking a book that people hate and hate reading it. I was genuinely having the best time reading this book and the nonsense of it. But my goal with the reading vlog after all of that was going to be to pick up this author, pick up one of his more recent releases and compare and talk about how much he's grown as an author and, you know, all of the good things to kind of promote his work. And not just read what is dubbed as the worst written book of all time. But I couldn't find any other books written by the author, so I did a little bit of digging, and I learned that his story kind of sucks. Essentially, he published the short story as a teenager in a magazine, and someone stole it and ripped his name off of it and published it without a name and marketed it as the worst book ever written. And then later he was like, hey, that's mine. And finally they credited him. And his treatment by the publishing industry throughout all of this and readers throughout all of this kind of made him lose his passion for writing. So he never published again. So instead I'm talking about it here because I genuinely enjoyed reading this novella written by a teenager with a thesaurus. Gosh, why can't I'm tripping over my words today. But I'm coupling it with how he was horribly treated by the publishing company that stole from him. So it is a really sad ending, but I wanted to talk about it here because this video is me talking about books that I didn't like, but I wanted to bring in a book that, yes, was poorly written, but was one of my favorite reads of the year. So technically it is one of the worst, but also a favorite. Most of the things on this list are least favorites. This one is a favorite, while still also being technically poorly written. All right, now let's get to the one that made me decide to make this video. It's called Kisses and Croissants. So I was planning, as I said, to not talk about this book at all on my channel. I was gonna read it privately. I was gonna talk about it with my niece because she asked me to buy her this book for Christmas and she wanted to read it. And so I bought it for her, gave it to her, then bought the ebook for me, and we were going to discuss. All of those events did occur, but I wanted so badly to DNF this book at the 10% mark, then the 20, then the 30, then the 40, then the 50. When I hit 90%, I near threw my e-reader out the window. This book was so painful to read. And it's not because it's a YA romance. I was okay with reading something very outside of what I tend to enjoy for the sake of a discussion with my niece. I didn't need it to be the perfect book for me, but this book was so frustrating to read. So we follow Mia, who is a ballet dancer, and she's gone to this program in Paris where she's going to be training and she's going to be performing and potentially get a scholarship or an internship, ballet stuff. She is paired with Audrey. She's paired with Audrey, who is her rival of the book, but there's some camaraderie that kind of comes up. I won't say too much, but I really liked that element of the story. And there's, of course, a romance. Louis, who is a French boy and who meets her on the steps at the ballet studio, and he's waiting for someone, but they have a meet cute, and he's like, you know what? My day just freed up. Let's go. And they go on the countryside and they go looking for an adventure because she has this family mystery that she's also kind of interested in digging into while she's in Paris as well. And he is pretty excited about this mystery and wants to help her solve it. So lots of elements happening in this book. Lots of reasons why this book could have been good, because I don't even care that it was insta-lovey. If the chemistry is there, then I can forgive some insta-love. And the chemistry was really well written between Mia and Louis. It was great, actually. The ballet scenes were detailed and interesting, and they were their own section of the story. The rivalry between her and Audrey were really interesting, and the romance and the mystery, all four components, quite good. Why did this book suck? Because of all the interesting elements of this story. The focus was on none of them, or at least not enough focus was on any of them. Instead, the plot kept getting distracted by unnecessary, shoehorned miscommunications, little spats for no reason, and something at the 90% mark that I can only describe as cheap, unnecessary drama, not even in the realm of miscommunication or, oh, I heard a rumor about you, or I jumped to a conclusion. We're talking about something completely external that didn't fit in the book, that was so stupid. Not only that, but Mia was insufferable. She was the most selfish character without the narrative ever actually pointing to the fact that she was so selfish. Throughout the entire book, she lies to all of her friends that are at this program with her, as she's like, I have a romance, but I don't want them to know because I don't want them to judge me, and I don't want them to know who I'm having a romance with because then they'll think that I'm getting preferential treatment, so I just won't tell anyone. And fair enough, your concerns are valid, but you don't have to outright lie about everything. You could just say, yes, I'm not hanging out with you today because I'm going on a date. I have a little Paris romance going on the side. I'm not going to talk to you about it though because it's my private life. This part I'm keeping personal. But instead of teaching young readers that communication is a great thing and setting boundaries is something that we're capable of doing, instead, she just lies through her teeth throughout the entire book with no consequences. None of her friends ever get mad at her, even when she's found out. They just don't care. They repeatedly are suspicious that she's lying and kind of try to gently call her out, and she just digs her heels in and lies harder. Nothing ever comes of that. They all are just like, apparently it's cool what she's doing. That's totally fine. But then also Louis, she treats horribly. She twice left him in the middle of a date. Well, once it was in the middle of a date and once it was during a social occasion that I don't think was technically a date. But anyway, one in particular that was their first official date and they were having a lovely time and it was really sweet, and then her friends showed up by coincidence and she just left. He answered a call, she saw her friends and she was like, bye. Like, she didn't even say bye to him. She just walked off with her friends. She went home with her friends. She was like, I'll text him later about it. And narratively, it was just mentioned in a sentence a chapter or two later where she was just like, yeah, I told him and he was totally fine with it. Like, it was never, there was no conversation of, hey, you kind of make me feel valueless when you do these things to me. Like, I'm cool with keeping a relationship a secret, but you not even considering me and just leaving without talking to me makes me feel bad. Or you running off repeatedly and always making a relationship about you doesn't feel super nice. Or anytime you get an inkling about my past or about something that may paint me in a negative light, you just lash out at me and make everything stupid drama for no reason. You could maybe talk to me. You could maybe communicate with me. I could maybe explain things to you. There's no conversation around any of Mia's really selfish actions throughout the entire book, except for people apologizing to her. People repeatedly apologize to her. People repeatedly are like, yeah, I'm sorry that I made you feel this way, but you totally misunderstood the situation, so let's talk it out. Like, but she doesn't apologize. The only apology that she gives in the entire book was to entirely selfish. Throughout a whole book full of her being really selfish, constantly treating other people as if they hold no value in the story. I mean, she is the most main character syndrome, main character I've ever seen, where everything revolves around her. She doesn't consider anyone else's feelings. None of her actions are determined by how they may affect other people, and the world just bends around her and everybody's like, I'm sorry you were put in a hard position. I don't need an apology from you. So the one apology that she actually gives in this book, she says, I didn't want to leave Paris knowing someone hated me. That was the apology. It was, I'm sorry. I wanted to address this because of how this could have affected me. That was her apology. Her apology was still about her. It wasn't, I'm sorry for jumping to conclusions and for judging your character based off of something that someone else said instead of based off of the evidence of how you've treated me throughout this entire book. It wasn't, I'm sorry for my incredibly selfish actions. It was, I'm sorry, I want to clear the air for my sake. And this is fine. This is fine. And then once again, just the whole world bends around her. Even at the one big thing that happened at the very end of the book that was completely unnecessary, that was nothing but needless drama. Even at that point where it seems like, okay, so like everything's over then. Like everything's ruined. There's just not really much coming back from this. Still, people were just like, people who treated her bad are all of a sudden treating her nice. People who didn't like her are all of a sudden liking her, and like the whole world bends around. Now you can still have everything. You still win the day. It doesn't actually, this big event doesn't actually affect anything hardly at all. So just wanted some drama here at the end. I feel bad roasting a book that was not written for me. But I'm not roasting it because it wasn't written for me. I'm roasting it because Mia was insufferable and the needless drama that was shoehorned, that was forcefully inserted into this book when there was so much room for actually interesting story elements. That's the thing. That's the thing. I would have loved this book. There's so many things that would have worked. So many things that were actually good about this book that could have made me enjoy a book outside of a category that I tend to like. But because it relied on old, tired, cheap tropes instead of the actually interesting, unique things about the story, I was so mad. But Mia herself made me furious. Anyway, I talked to my niece about it and she too hated the thing at the end that was unnecessary. She's like, why ruin the entire book for this? This was so not worth it. But she loved the romance and she loved the story. And we had some really good chats out of this book. So hey, I got something out of it. 1 star. Louis, find someone else to date. This one's bad, throw her back. Find someone that treats you better. You deserve better. Anyway, those were the books that I read this year, or rather last year, that I didn't love. If you have read any of them and loved them, I'm so happy for you. I want you to love what you read, but I didn't love these ones in particular, and that was why. That's all. Feel free to chat with me more about any of these books if you've read them. If you had similar opinions, different opinions, I would love to hear from you. And if you haven't read any of these books and you want to talk about something that you hated this year, feel free to sound off in the comments. My next video will be positive. I promise. I don't do a lot of wholly negative videos, but you know, this book made me mad. So anyway, I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday on this channel, Mondays and Fridays on the manga channel, which is always linked in the description. I'll see you again soon. Bye.